How can India ensure nutritional security of our citizens? How will we fight climate change? Will we ever find out the origin of SARS-CoV-2? If these questions occupy your mind space, join a group of like-minded peers and understand the public policy underpinnings of Indian life sciences. Apply now for Takshashila Institution's 4-week life science policy course, which begins from the 14th of September. Till then, enjoy this episode.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarthak and I welcome you to All Things Policy. Recently, the Commerce and Industry Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, emphasized the stagnant growth of India's manufacturing sector. Its contribution to nation's GDP and employment remains limited. Further, India doesn't have enough cities. There are few large urban centers, but again, they don't have the essential infrastructure. The quality of life in Indian cities is also not up to the mark. In light of this, the recent union government proposal is quite relevant. Last week, the cabinet announced a plan to establish 12 greenfield industrial townships, and the official notification states that the aim of these industrial townships is to revolutionize India's industrial landscape. In this episode, my colleague Rijesh and I will discuss and analyze this particular measure. How significant is this measure? What can be the hindrances? What could be done better? Hi Rijesh, welcome to All Things Policy.
Thank you, Sarthak. Excited to be here, and let's get going.
Yeah. So, first of all, what is this recent government announcement? So, last week, the government approved 12 industrial nodes/cities under the National Industrial Corridor Development Program. And as I just mentioned some time back, the aim is to revolutionize India's industrial landscape. And the total outlay is somewhere around 28,000 crores. And the idea is 12 cities will be set up. And again, these cities are in different states. I think 10 states. Again, some of these townships are in the northern part of India, some in the southern part of India, Uttarakhand, Punjab, Rajasthan, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Kerala. These are some of the places where these sites have been identified. And again, the government has also identified certain objectives. They have identified certain goals. For instance, these industrial townships will eventually attract investments from large industries and also from MSMEs. And they also will be creating jobs, some 1 million in direct jobs and some 3 million indirect jobs. And this will also help facilitate exports. Again, the government says that some $2 trillion of exports by 2030 will be made possible because of these different industrial hubs and cities or nodes that are being created. So, Rijesh, what do you think about this?
I mean, it's interesting. One could definitely argue that India needs more new cities. So, from that sense, it makes sense for the government to say this. And I just wanted to add that these 12 cities, they are all actually announced on locations along the Golden Quadrilateral.
Yeah.
And along 6 industrial corridors. So there seems some thought at least seems to have gone into where they should build these cities. But obviously, as we will go along, we will ask questions around some of these decisions and whether they could have been made better. But what I wanted to focus on is these are not just industrial parks, right? They're going to be industrial smart cities and hopefully lead to what we call of as clusters, right?
Yeah.
So maybe then I think one thing I would like to ask you is, what are clusters and how do they typically develop?
Yeah, in fact, before that, what was important or what I felt important from that notification was the words that they have used, right? Mm-hmm. They've used terms like greenfield, which Correct. Implies that, okay,
it's new.
This is going to be new.
Yeah.
Apart from that, certain words like plug and play.
Ahead of demand.
Walk to work.
Yeah.
And also, there is some focus on sustainability because green investments and some of those things have been part of that notification. They have also used the term sustainable, right? So maybe they're thinking of the future. Again, India being a signatory of net zero and all those things, Correct. Maybe relevant here.
So alongside that, they've also mentioned that it will, work in conjunction with the PM Gati logistics project.
Yeah.
And so, these are not cities that are being built in isolation. They will be they're being built along our industrial corridors. They will have multimodal transport layers available. Clearly, the government is thinking of pre-allocating land parcels and providing it quickly. The plug and play idea, which is like you basically just come and set up your companies. So it's a fairly well thought out, piece of legislature, let's say, or a piece of mission to build these 12 new cities.
Okay. So the first thought that I have was on greenfield projects, right? So you are creating cities from scratch.
Yeah.
Now, what is the economic rationale behind this, right? Should we be creating cities from scratch, or should we be trying to expand the existing cities, maybe horizontally, or should we be increasing the density of our current cities, because that is also not up to the mark currently.
Yeah.
So this thing about greenfield projects, starting cities from scratch, there are different models. What do you think about that?
So, in the context of trying to build it as an industrial hub, I mean, if you look at the research, right, all the way from Michael Porter in 98 to any of the research, they all suggest the same thing, that it is near impossible to build a successful industrial cluster from scratch. Clusters typically build organically. I mean, there's a lot of path dependence. Some event happens in some place, or there's some pre-existing resource like a great university producing talent, and as a result of that, startups come up around the place, and then it grows, which is what happened with Silicon Valley, right? Originally, Silicon Valley was where semiconductor innovation took place. Today, that's where AI innovation takes place. Semiconductor innovation happens in Taiwan. So a cluster typically develops organically. The idea that you could just build a smart city cluster, I don't know. I don't think it's really worked that well across the world. Typically, what's happened is that there's been pre-existing cities which have some talent in place, and then governments run schemes, programs there to build on top of that.
Yeah. So basically, there is some local expertise, and that expertise combines with ideas across, and it gradually develops. And cities typically have that role of a catalyst, maybe, to expand it further.
Absolutely.
Starting from scratch might not have been very successful. Maybe you can set up administrative cities, but when it comes to tech clusters or industrial clusters, generally there is this path dependence.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, clusters typically build bottom up, not top down. It's very difficult to, for example, if you're going to build 12 clusters here, then how do you know which kind of an industry is suited to be built in which cluster?
Yeah.
Right? These are not the kind of decisions that governments ought to be making.
Yeah.
You could say, I'll build 12 new cities and we'll see what comes up. That might have been another way to do it. But typically it's a bottom up thing. Something shows signs of turning into a cluster where things agglomerate, startups start, universities come up, research lab come up, people start going and staying there, just like it happened in Bangalore with IT. And then you start to say, okay, now on top of this, can I build something?
So this is an interesting point, since you mentioned Bangalore, right? So one of the prominent clusters is the Silicon Valley cluster in US, right? And countries world over, they have been trying to replicate it.
Exactly.
But you don't see any of those instances. In India also, the successful instance that we have, I mean, I would say that Bangalore is a success. Again, that was also not necessarily replicated. It emerged somewhere.
Exactly.
Right? So trying to engineer some of these things, we don't have enough evidence that engineering these kind of things works. Now, again, going back to the government notification, right? So they have chosen these 12 areas. And since you were saying, if you select areas where there is already some sort of expertise, then maybe things will be better. Right now, what are your initial thoughts? Have these 12 cities that have been chosen right now, are they based on some of these comparative advantages? Since you have some grievances about Palakkad being chosen.
So, I mean, like...
by the way, Rijesh is from Kerala, so...
So the thing about Palakkad is, it is about an hour away from Coimbatore. As far as I can tell, Palakkad has no, industrial or educational hubs or capabilities of any sort. Other than the fact that it lies on an industrial corridor that connects Bangalore to all these places, Chennai to Bangalore corridor, I don't see any other reason for that to be there. You might as well, it's so close to Coimbatore that one might wonder, you could argue that it's just a twin city to Coimbatore, as opposed to a fresh city. And that's fine. But my point is, I don't know, for example, what industries or what particular capabilities exist in Gaya, in Bihar, for that to now be a new smart industrial city, right? Is there enough talent pools available? Are there educational or research hubs nearby? Is there good infrastructure? Ports nearby? What is the reason to choose that particular location? And on that note, another way to think about this would be like, if the Indian government could have also said, look, we want to build 12 smart cities in India.
Yeah.
We're allocating 28,000 crores, but we haven't decided where those cities are. We're just going to leave it up to private consortia.
Yeah.
To say that, yes, we want to build, let's say, an electric vehicle manufacturing hub.
Yeah.
And we think this is the right location, and whatever, 10 companies come together to build. And then the government decides that, okay, this is something we want to fund for. And then they fund a city on that location or try to build the hub there. That would have been another way to do it, in my opinion, a slightly more bottom-up way to do it, because who better than that industry to tell you where the right location is for that, right? But now you're saying these are the 12 places. And I don't know if they are or are not the right places. Nobody knows. I mean, only the companies can tell us that.
Yeah. So basically, we are assuming that the government knows better, and they might not have the skin in the game.
Yeah.
And maybe the private players, they are better when it comes to evaluating the potential, economic potential, future potential of these hubs or cities, right? So maybe the government, and what is the reason why the government will be better? We don't even have that.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know, right? What could be the reason why the government is better in choosing these locations?
Yeah, if you go with a private-led consortia scheme where they are putting their money and it is their skin in the game, then they have far more incentive to figure out exactly the right location. Now, it may well be the case that they may all come back and say that, oh, we want to build a hub near Bangalore or near Coimbatore.
Yeah.
It might be the case that all of their proposals are essentially to grow the size of your existing cities. And maybe that is the right outcome. Again, I don't know. But I personally believe that would have been the better model, rather than picking the 12 places where you want to build the cities.
Now, the next aspect, right, is the policy instruments, right? What exactly will the government be doing? This is a union government policy. So again, the union government, what are its policy instruments for building up these 12 cities? Now, I want to highlight that there is not much clarity as of now, at least the official notification that we saw. They do mention that there will be ready to allot lands. So maybe they have identified certain land parcels, these cities, these places, they would have identified the parcels, and if there is a private investor, they can easily give it to them maybe. So it kind of does away with the land acquisition and all those issues that many firms in India have faced in the past. Apart from that, they do mention that they will be creating these cities as per global standards, but we don't know what exactly constitutes global standards. And again, these are global standards for what? Also, they have a particular. They have used some particular terms. For instance, they are saying these cities will be built ahead of demand, on a plug and play and walk to work concepts. Again, I don't know whether government should be in the business of building something ahead of demand. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think governments have ever shown. The predictive power of the government to say where demand will come is kind of low. And it's very tough to say that if I build a city here, demand will come there by necessity. So I don't even know what ahead of demand means, right? And ahead of demand does not mean that demand will come. It simply means you built first and you're hoping that demand
comes. Yeah.
So I'm not sure about what that actually means. I mean, but hopefully, right? Like, other than the ready to allot land, because it is being run through the industrial corridor development thing, the department. Maybe there are already a set of best practices on what makes for good industrial parks and things like that. And hopefully, you'll have like single window approvals and all of those things in place, which at the very least you'll need if you want to build an industrial hub.
Yeah. So this can something which can help reduce all the system related issues, right?
Correct.
The transaction costs can be reduced, and also maybe the single window approval can address the coordination failures and all that we typically see. And then one thing is not quite clear about who is going to implement all these things, right? Or who are the actors involved here, policy actors involved, and what are the relations between them, or how will they get everyone on board? Because when you are setting up cities, ideally, I mean, if you look at the Indian state, right, there are multiple levels of government. You have the union government, state governments, and then you have the local bodies. Functions are also distributed between them. There is a union government notification which says, okay, land parcels will be allocated. Land typically falls under the ambit of the state. And then union and the local governments also have a role to play. So how will how are the roles divided between them? How will there be a policy convergence, policy coherence? That is also not clear, and that can be a major issue, right? Maybe the union government announces it, but at local levels there might be some resistance, and then what do you do? The projects can get stalled.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many other such initiatives have been there in the past where we have been able to address this and we have been able to go out with it. In the past, we have had smart cities and we don't talk about it
Anymore. Yes. And also recently we had in Bangalore, like the state government deciding to provide reservations in the private sector, for example, for conductors. Now, that is an example of a local law that, what if you set up another smart city near Bangalore and suddenly this law comes into place, right? Where this is not part of your deal when you sit and you decided to go and participate in this project. So those are questions. You do need policy convergence. And actually that is an interesting thing we can think about, where you have these 12 new industrial hubs / cities coming up, right? These could all be in some sense, I don't know, public policy labs, if you will, where you can try out experiments, right? What if you could create a city government that is
We'll come to that, Rijesh.
Oh, sorry, I've jumped away.
We'll discuss all these solutions in one go.
So Sarthak, we just stopped before we talked about the solutions. So what do you think are a good set of solutions for these cities that we're trying to set up?
Yeah, thanks, Rijesh. In fact, I was thinking of something at a slightly broad level. That is, why are we even trying to create these 12 cities, right? Maybe our focus should be on creating enabling conditions which help emergence of cities.
Correct.
Right? At this point of time, I think there are a lot of barriers which prevent emergence of cities. So maybe address that. And if you create these enabling conditions, maybe cities will emerge. Maybe you'll have more than 12 cities, and maybe these cities will not necessarily be in the places where you have identified now, right? And these cities, since they have emerged on their own, there is an inherent economic reasoning why they would have rationale why they would have emerged, and these are most likely going to be more profitable entities, right? And they will be contributing to the economic growth, regional growth, sectoral growth, and all these things. So maybe we can think of that. For instance, right now there are different kinds of barriers to movement of labor. I mean, again, the constitution says that you can easily move from one place to another, you can profess any trade occupation, but in reality, that is not the case. As you were just mentioning, Karnataka came up with a proposal recently for reservation for people who are domiciled, right, in Karnataka, and many other states have done it.
Yeah.
So these kind of policies, and not just policies, sometimes you also have different cultural barriers, which can also impact movement of labor. Similarly, when it comes to land related policies, right, real estate, there also you have different kinds of restrictions. It might not be that easy to acquire land. It might not be easy to, again, expand whatever entities that you have. Infrastructure, if you have better infrastructure, again, maybe cities will emerge on their own. Maybe because, again, expansion of markets is there. You are able to get market related information. You can go to more markets. So all these things can be important.
Yeah.
What are the factors which at this point of time prevent access to capital? What are those things which enable entrepreneurship? Maybe we can think of some of these things. Our taxation policies, corporate taxes in India tends to be quite high. Maybe some sort of reduction in that. So if you focus on all these things, there will be emergence of more entrepreneurial activities. More cities might come up, right? So at a broader level, this can be something.
Fair point.
But let's say this thing is, as it is already being, it has been already been decided, approved, right?
Yeah.
So in that case, what do you think can be done better?
Okay. So two things. I noticed in one of the announcements that at least in one of those cities that have been selected, Zahirabad, Hyundai has already proposed a 450-acre industrial park for themselves, right? So the first thing I would argue is that in these kind of cases where you're trying to build an industrial city, you should avoid being anchored to a single large company. And ideally what you want is a consortia, because what you want to do is, in today's world, single firms will not lead to success, right? What you need is to be able to build ecosystems. So you need consortia. The problem with, let's say, Hyundai setting up the hub, and you effectively are just subsidizing Hyundai's manufacturing or their research. It's just a one-for-one replacement for their money with public money. I'd much rather that you encourage consortia to come there, which is why we were originally discussing that it should be private player led, because building a new industrial hub is too large a project for any single player. It is very likely that a consortia will come and say, look, I am Tata Motors, I am Ashok Leyland, I am Ola. We all want to build an EV-based ecosystem in this place, something like that. It's too big for one player, but it's large enough for a consortium. So in that case, the policies or the subsidies that you provide will be towards the conversation
The industry, not
you're not
the
subsidizing a firm, you're doing things that the industry as a whole needs, whether it is talent shortage, whether it is research lab setting up, whatever it might be. And I think that is a slightly more useful, better model.
and this also can prevent some of the unintended consequences like not regulatory capture or some sort of these kind of things, right? Government failures. It can possibly address that.
Absolutely. The second thing is that you have an opportunity here for 12 new cities. It might be a chance for us to experiment with new ways of governance of these cities and such. Like, for example, what we were talking about, the policy coherence piece, right? Instead of having the state government, the central government, municipal governments all at odds with each other because of different kinds of regulations, could you set up each of these cities as like some kind of an independent unit where within the context of that city there is one centralized authority making all the decisions, whether it is around labor laws, tax laws perhaps, or at least around the most important decisions. And again, like a single window for making these kind of decisions. That might be an interesting experiment to try. It may allow us to try different kinds of labor laws, for example, which is very difficult to push through on an all India or a statewide basis. Only in these clusters we try different laws. See what happens. It could become like an experimental tool for public policy itself.
Yeah. And in fact, if things go well, maybe it is worth replicating in other places. And if things go well, maybe there is an incentive for other states to also do the same thing. Do the same thing.
And it also leads to competition. If each of these 12 cities are independent to the extent that they can make their own choices, one would expect to see some of them do well and others not do well. And I think actually that's a good outcome. We should not expect that all 12 cities will succeed.
Definitely.
Some might succeed, some won't succeed, and that's fine. If 3 or 4 succeed out of 12, that's a fantastic outcome.
Definitely.
And the government should hopefully be willing to say that we will fund the 4 successful cities and help them grow much faster, and the 8 that didn't work out, it didn't work out. It's okay.
So this is basically kind of a lab. It's a laboratory where you are experimenting with policies. Correct. Usually, given the political economy in India, it's difficult to do these kind of experiments at a larger level. Maybe at a smaller scale you can do that. So a good way to experiment.
In fact, I honestly think that our real estate policies and our ability to acquire land is so bad that may be one of the reasons why the government has decided that in these 12 areas we are willing to give you. Maybe the entire reason they pick these 12 locations is because they feel confident that in these 12 places they can provide large areas. I don't know. It's possible.
Yeah. And I think another thing is we should not be just restricting or limiting ourselves to just setting up the industries over there.
Yeah.
The focus should be on expanding it further, right? So, in fact, we did mention the term cluster at some point of time in the past, but the official notification doesn't use the term cluster. It uses the term city/nodes, but it can expand further to create clusters. Now, when we use the term clusters, it implies that there are massive productivity gains in these areas, and this productivity gains happen because of sharing of common inputs, because of knowledge spillovers that happen between the institutions that are there, between the firms that are there, between the firms and the different institutions like R&D labs, educational institutions, government agencies. So it should further expand. That also implies that you need to have these things in place, R&D labs or educational institution, all these things. Maybe government has some role to play in this. For instance, public spending on R&D makes sense because, again, R&D has massive positive externalities. But at the same time, private R&D is also important. Globally, private sector plays a very significant role in R&D. It is usually the private players who spend an enormous amount of money on R&D. But there also government has a role to play. Maybe incentivize private players.
Absolutely. I mean, what you talked about, right? All of these things, you would expect that if we build successful clusters, all these things will appear eventually.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in other podcasts where we talked about India spending on R&D. Like GERD is low for India compared to other countries. Here is an opportunity now where if things work out ideally, you have 12 locations which you've identified. In all 12 locations, let's say you have 12 different industry consortia coming up. Here is an opportunity where they are willing to bring in R&D because they're setting up large amounts of money there. And for you to fund some of that R&D. Maybe some of the more basic R&D you will fund, the rest of it will come from private players. Either way, here is an opportunity for you to push R&D growth in specific identified sectors, And again, with the educational institutes,
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to education institutions, setting of education institutions in India is a pain.
it's a
Massive
pain.
barriers,
It's a massive
right?
pain, yeah.
Maybe ease some of these regulations here and see how things work out.
Again, as a policy lab, not just labor laws, right? Maybe make it easy for any world-class institute to come and set up an institute in one of these cities, no questions asked. No AICT regulation, no nothing.
Yeah.
Come set it up. If you want to set up your engineering labs here, great, and teach those courses, great. Why not? You can try that.
And this can actually feed into one another, right? The
Yeah.
educational institutions can be the ones which supply high quality labor to your industries, and again, the industries can improve the educational outcomes in these institutions, right? So there can be this two-way relationship.
And also talent in terms of future startups, right? Like if you look at Silicon Valley, Boston, all these areas, right? Most of the new startups are coming out of these small incubator labs from Stanford, MIT. Students who are doing research there, they come up with an idea, they get incubated, they come out and they set it up in Silicon Valley, they set it up in Boston. That's how those sectors continue to grow, those areas continue to attract new talent. So that's another advantage long term of an education institute. That's good. So yeah, there are lots of spillover benefits if we think larger than just an industrial hub. It should. What would be a bad outcome for me is if we end up setting 12 essentially industrial parks and call them smart cities or whatever you want to call them. But if there are just 12 large manufacturing hubs providing simple manufacturing jobs, yeah, there's some benefit to employment there, but let's hope we don't stop there.
Exactly. In fact, this is the right way to conclude this discussion. There are huge costs if you are just setting up these parks and you are not getting the right kind of outcomes. We should go ahead and use this as avenues where you can experiment with policies, some of the reforms which have been long pending, and also it should move up to becoming clusters where you are ensuring that there is higher R&D, there is creation of more goods, there are more exports. So we should not be stopping at just the parks, it should move up.
Absolutely.
Thank you, folks, for joining us in this episode of All Things Policy. We'll meet again in one more episode.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.